Look, as Kath said, I'm Greg Chipp, CEO of Drug Policy Australia, which is a new NGO dedicated to harm reduction and promoting harm reduction. The unique thing about Drug Policy Australia is it's a registered charity and a advocacy-only group, which I'll talk about in a minute. Look, firstly, I'd just like to thank the organisers, Kath, the whole Hemp Embassy crew that's got this event together year in, year out. I'd like to thank Michael Boulderstone for his inspiring talk at the start there. Yeah, like a hand for Michael. I don't think it was loud enough before. He's absolutely fantastic. Clear and emotional, which is something I'd like to get to in a minute. I'd like to thank the Nimbin community for celebrating the cannabis culture in Australia, which is live, it's real, and it's happening. The cannabis culture is a persecuted culture under the realms of prohibition, so it's quite amazing in Australia that we've had Nimbin waving the flag, pointing to the injustice, and quite often putting their bodies in the way of these unjust cannabis laws. Okay, what I'm going to talk about, the topic is, there we go, audio visual's good. Yeah, look, basically to challenge some of the assumptions of prohibition. Drug use is just as old as the civilisation itself, as Michael said, and probably older. You know, there's cases of other species consuming alcohol and getting shit-faced and, you know, basically enjoying themselves, and mankind is no different. So what I want to really look at, and just as a bit of a thought piece, is challenge the assumptions of prohibition. And once you get to the assumptions of why these things, what the other side of the argument thinks, then it's possible to perhaps challenge them with reasoned argument. And that's perhaps what we've got to do in the face of, there's no other way to put this, blind prejudice. That is what we're up against. Perhaps a Puritan ethic, an ethic that says, Judeo-Christian tradition, that says pleasure is wrong. To enjoy yourself is wrong, and whether that's moved from the sexual pleasures into the pleasures of perhaps recreational drugs or even alcohol, these are the, I guess, some of the assumptions that we're up against. A little bit perhaps just to explain myself, who is Greg Chipp, why am I heading a charity called Drug Policy Australia? And I guess it comes back to, like any 14-year-old, any 8-year-old, you begin to sort of grow up, wake up, look at the world, and you go, what the fuck am I doing here? It's a natural part of consciousness, of being alive, to question those things. And then we move into adulthood. For example, as kids, we play giddy, you know, where you're at kindergarten, you spin yourself around a dozen times till you fall over and almost crack your head. Get up and feel a bit different. I mean, that is experimenting with an alternative state of consciousness. And the truth is, it's a bloody dangerous thing to do if you've ever done it, to do it outside away from the monkey bars. I know that from personal experience. And then I guess at 14 I began to be interested in alternative states of mind, consciousness. As I said before, the who am I, what am I doing here, is there a God, what are the confines of my mind, can I transcend it? And I was interested in drugs, which are clearly a way to look at a different consciousness, perhaps a way to enlightenment. And it was just natural curiosity. I remember when I was 14, I was busted badly for a bottle of whiskey on a family holiday, and I suggest many people here have had the same experience. I will say it was a forerunner of things to come, so I ran into more trouble than being busted for a bottle of whiskey later in life. But look, I had a terrific relationship with my father and asked the question, quite honestly, you know, why are drugs illegal? And like any father concerned, you know, that I should take the road to rack and ruin, you know, become an alcoholic or a drug addict, he answered with thoughtful answers. The first one I'll never forget. He said, well, look, if you use drugs, you'll be dead before you're 30, or could be dead before you're 30. And You know, that is somewhat true if you look at the ravages of addiction that has got a massive toll on Australian society. We still have about 500 people a year die of a heroin overdose, and I always think, but for the grace of God, there go I. But not to be put off by the danger, in fact probably a little encouraged. Here's a little bit of the irony of drugs. We are encouraged by risk-taking behaviour at a young age. And I suppose the second thing that my father said to me, drugs are addictive. Yeah? I was pretty worldly even at 14 or 16. I knew people were smoking pot and they weren't addicted. So, you know, the myth that using drugs is a road to addiction is just wrong. And then even narcotics, which I started to delve into my mid-20s, the myth that one use of heroin or one toke on an ice pipe is going to lead to the road of addiction is just wrong. The facts and figures are that perhaps 10% of people that use alternative substances become addicted. Now, whether this be alcohol, cannabis, you know, or any substance, some people will go on to develop problematic use. And as new science has come to light, keep in mind these discussions I was having with my father was 40 years ago, that addictiveness really has a lot to do with the person, not the drug. You know, you unveil a little bit of powder in a corner and, oh, no, it's going to be addictive. That's not the case, but that was the prevailing point of view going back 40 or 50 years. And the fact that drugs are addictive is a fact I guess we've got to address. Certainly an advocacy organisation like mine that advocates for the decriminalisation of all drugs, as has been done in Portugal, and I'll delve into it a little bit more lately. But we advocate that, but we certainly don't advocate the use of drugs, encourage people to use drugs. In actual fact, drugs can be dangerous. There's not a shadow of a doubt. They can be addictive. But there's also other things. They can be beneficial, perhaps in spiritual and other areas. They can be relaxants. They can be used therapeutically. So, you know, the drugs is a danger. Addiction is a danger, but let's not overreact to it. And here's the new evidence. I'll just tell a little story that I think some of you might have read about in a book by Johann Hari called Rat Park. There was an experiment done in the late 60s, in fact late 50s, early 60s, replicated and had terrific scientific traction, that you put rats in a park, you give them an option of cocaine, and another one was done with heroin, and these poor rats end up absolute junkies. You know, they dose themselves to death. And this was used as a proof in the pudding that drugs are addictive. You give a mammal like a mouse, a rat, which is very similar to the in brain chemistry, to the human brain. They use the drug, they become addicted, and they dose themselves to death. So you transfer that into human behaviour, and you've got a perfect case to say drugs are addictive, drugs are dangerous, we've got to ban them. If somebody uses drugs, boy, they're gone, they're going to end up addicted and dead, as my father said to me. Now, in the 70s and in fact the 80s, psychologists began to delve a little bit more into the human brain, and the advances in science in the last 10 and 20 years is just phenomenal. But what was discovered was, in a sociological experiment, if you put rats in Rat Park, a happy environment where they've got little Ferris balls wheels to play on, they've got plenty of food, they've got other rats to have sex with, you know, basically Rat Park. Now, those rats, given the option to dose themselves on heroin or alcohol or narcotics, don't dose themselves to death. And it's an astounding result that completely and utterly disproved the theory of addiction, that it is the drug, something evil in the substance that we as human beings have got to guard ourselves against. So this is again one of the first, I guess, assumptions, if you like, of prohibition is the nature of addiction itself. And I certainly don't deny that cannabis is an addictive substance. I've been addicted to cannabis myself for many years, and I will say loved it, but that's perhaps not the point. The point is that you can develop problematic use with cannabis. You can use it too often to the point of your own motivation, your own goals in life. And while I'm just finish up on this thought of what is addiction, and I'd like to say how does one overcome addictions, and I have overcome addictions from my life, from tobacco through to heroin, a short period of my life. It has to do with motivation. It has to do with wanting something positive in life. And I think, we've got people here that will know of people that do have problems, and I can just implore you to talk to them and look at the underlying factors that lead to that addiction. Let them find something that they want in life more than using drugs. And that would be certainly the answer, and this is only an anecdotal sort of case, my own situation, but it is backed up by experiments like Rack Park, that if you have alternatives in life, you're unlikely to want to be getting up and having a bong at 7 o'clock in the morning. If life's dull and boring, then there is a good chance that you may think, oh hell, I'll have a bong. And here's one of the great ironies of prohibition that I think we've really got to get out and fight, is the fact that the forced abstinence, the police that come in and invade our homes at will, that go to a train station or a pub with a dog and sniff your bloody groin for a little bit of pot. The fear, the apprehension of marijuana, of being busted for marijuana or being busted for other drugs, of going between the law courts, of being embarrassed in family and friends, of being stigmatised, of being vilified. They are the very factors that lead us to become problematic drug users. So the irony of the prohibition is that attempting to help to resolve this problem under some idea that we're going to make the world drug-free really makes the problem worse. And this is why I guess I've formed this charity group, Drug Policy Australia, to attack the very cause of the assumptions of prohibition. Now, I'll just give you a little bit about Drug Policy Australia, what it is. Our constitution is, at the principle, we're a charity for a start, and I'll possibly even pass a hat around later and see if we can get anyone to pitch in a couple of bucks, but we are a charity, and that was a big deal, to be an advocacy-only charity. And you read our constitution here. The principal purposes of the company are to promote the prevention and control of diseases associated with the use of psychoactive substances by a way of harmonisation approach through public education, research and advocacy. Advocacy is the big thing that we need to do. Get to the pollies that basically make electoral capital out of law and order, and they're doing it again, and I've got some examples later on. It's an obscenity. But also through public education, because unless we stand up as people, a generation that knows a little bit about drugs, or younger generations, unless we win hearts and minds on this, we will never get these laws changed. A reason that I'm involved in the whole drug prohibition debate is I looked up, let me put it another way, start again. At 21 at university, we were smoking pot, we were smoking it before lectures, we were smoking it in lectures. And I will say to those that think that's advocating the use of pot, marijuana, cannabis, it's not. I enrolled in law, I didn't get a law degree, I had to fall back to get an arts degree, and that was probably due to my preoccupation, we called it in Monash University, then it's been there in a small cafeteria. But the thing was, I thought that at least marijuana would be legal in 5 years' time. And I went on my merry way, I got corporate jobs, I made some money, and I lived a good life. But I looked around 5 years ago and I saw that it's not legal, but worse, they're ratcheting up the persecution. And this is what we're talking about here, persecution of people that want to enjoy a herb, for God's sake, a thing that grows in the ground of its own accord, the madness of that. And I got angry. And I'm still angry about this, and I feel it's incumbent upon my generation to get this problem fixed. So, I've stood for Parliament to try and wave the flag, and when I possibly don't think that the politics is the way to solve this, I've formed what's a fully fledged advocacy charity It was a bit of a battle because there's been no advocacy organisation in Australia that has been allowed to advocate. Traditional charities do good work, feed the poor, provide rehabilitation services, but there was a new Charities Act in 2013 that opened the door for advocacy charities. So we've been registered. It was a big fight with the Australian Charities Commission. Took us about a 100-page submission and a few years, and I would mention this only if there's someone in the audience that also wants to create a charity and advocate for this. There are opportunities in the new definitions of charity, but we are advancing health, and drugs is so integrally connected with the health of the community. Promoting the prevention and control of diseases is one of our charity subtypes, and clearly there's a number of diseases associated with drug use, whether it be AIDS, hepatitis C, the medical ramifications of medical cannabis. It's all over. But here's the significant thing. One of our subtypes is to promote and oppose change to the law, government or practice, meaning we can hassle the shit out of the government and still be a registered charity. And that's the job that we, as people that understand this issue, have got to do. And as I've said before, we are regulated with the Australian Tax Department. They're a little bit loath to regular charities, but legislatively the laws have changed and it opens the door. So try and think of Drug Policy Australia as the Australian Conservation Foundation of drug law reform. We've got a structure in place, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. Basically what we believe in a nutshell is we believe that legally enforced abstinence is unrealistic and unhealthy and counterproductive in modern Australia, which has one of the highest per capita consumptions of drugs in the world. I mean, we're world leaders in this. If there was Olympics, Australia would be right up there. Third in terms of cannabis production, consumption. And one of the great ironies of this debate is we consume more cannabis than countries that have more liberal cannabis laws. I mean, go figure, Amsterdam, not so much. Portugal, which I'll talk about a little later, has decriminalised all drugs, not so much. And this is again the irony of prohibition, or one of the myths, if you like, that prohibition is going to reduce consumption. There's an assumption of the approach, of prohibition approach, that the only way to attack the drug scourge, the frightening addictiveness of drugs, is to limit supply, stop people doing it, and more obsessively and more mad, let's make the world drug-free, which was the mantra for the United Nations in 1998. Have you ever heard anything mad? Make the world drug-free? What are these bloody idiots trying to do? Get the last seed of marijuana, get it in the hall, and well done, boys, we've managed to solve that one. Now let's go on to world hunger. Let's get on to poverty now. I mean, look, this is, to me, an emotional issue because that's wrong. I mean, that's madness. It's pursuing prohibition policies that are damaging, but at the expense of real problems that we as a human species face, and this is what we've got to look at. Harm reduction, I just want to touch on that as an alternative approach to this prohibition, trying to stop people using drugs. There are other ways to minimise the harms caused by drugs. And as I say, of course I admit there's drugs. I've had a drug problem myself 25 years ago. People can recover. So a harm reduction approach is simply a pragmatic way of saying, look, let's not just concentrate all our efforts on law enforcement and try and stop people using drugs. It's never going to work. Let's get those people that do use drugs and educate them on the best way. And Damon Adams, who's a friend of mine I've known for 4 years, said no drugs. I just think that's a great catchphrase, Damon, if you're there. We do need to know about drugs, get the facts, get the information, and that's perhaps where the answer is in terms of even harm reduction. Australia was once a leader in harm reduction back in the 80s, 84, 85, when we had Bob Hawke as a Prime Minister. He had a daughter with a heroin problem. He called a conference in Canberra. And, the man cried on camera about his daughter's problems. He had some heart and he understood what the problem was. He had a drug summit. And Australia was one of the leaders in resolving the world drug problem with AIDS. We introduced needle exchange facilities in all states, which is credited, interestingly enough, with saving tens 1,000 or at least 10,000 lives in Australia and saving hundreds of millions of dollars in the cost of this AIDS scourge. Other countries that didn't, and still in fact countries don't have needle exchange areas, are still suffering. So, you know, needle exchange is a classic harm minimisation area. Look, I'm going to move on quickly here, and I'll bring up some of these things as we go. You can see I'm a man obsessed, and I've got a lot of things to say.
Greg, you've only got 5 minutes before questions.
I just looked at my time, so look, we can raise this later. So look, I'll move along, and this is okay, but what I wanted to do was just give you some facts and figures and a little bit of context for where we're going here. The National Drug Household Survey Detail 203, you might have heard of this. It gives us an idea of how much Australia are world leaders in drugs. The two biggest drugs, the two biggest killers in Australia is not cannabis, it's not heroin, it's tobacco and alcohol by such a margin that cannabis and other drugs aren't even in the race. Look, I won't dwell on this, but I did want to just give you an overview of what sort of numbers we're talking. I think it was Michael said there's 2 million Australians that use cannabis regularly. Well, that's your top your line on the cannabis thing, the cannabis usage there, which is 10%. Of people have pretty much used cannabis. It's varied a little bit, but if, look, 2 million Australians over the age of 14 to 20 million, I should say, approximately, it's 2 million Australians. So you can say that those people that do use cannabis, you're not alone. For whatever reasons you use it, whether it's medical or you know, to feel good, to cope with your depression, which to me has always been a quasi-medical cause, you're not alone. But look at the figures there on tobacco. One of the optimistic points on these figures is the tobacco figure has reduced from 93, almost cut in half over the last 10 years, meaning, you know, health reduction strategies can be put in place to warn people about the dangers of using drugs. You know, to point out if they do develop problematic drug use, then there's, you know, answers to what they should do. Look, the National Household Survey, again put out by the government authoritative on the number of users in Australia. Look, I just wanted to point out a couple of quick things there. The age groups is interesting that are using drugs, 20 to 30s. Over here are the biggest users of cannabis. The synthetic cannabis, which to me is a massive concern because these are not a natural herb tested by thousands of years of use, but they're accessible to children. So one of the things with harm minimisation strategies is, and regulating cannabis, legalising and regulating cannabis, is you begin to control the black market, the quality. You have packaging, you put them out of the hands of kids, such as occurs in the case of alcohol. You have a regulated market and you control. And Drug Policy Australia and those other advocacy groups, of which there's a few, I know there's Will from Unharmed, here we'll be talking later. There's a number of movements, Harm Reduction Australia, that are springing up. You know, we're forming a movement in Australia because we're about at a point where we're really saying that we've had it, we know this is wrong and we're getting together, and that's the exciting thing that's happening. Look, over to another authoritative figure on drug use, and more is the arresting rate. Australian crime condition. Now, look, these figures are just a total indictment of the law and order effort. You've got 60. Here's a list of all of the busts in Australia for drugs. 60% of those are for cannabis. You know, the low-hanging fruit, the easy mark for the police, the excuse for police to you know, run through your home and personally get their arrest rates up. It's an obscenity that we should be spending 60% of our law enforcement budget on cannabis. And just to give you some hard numbers on this, the numbers of arrests were 112,000 in 2013, 112,000 people, 60% of those for cannabis. And I just want to try and give you a picture of this. 66,000 people arrested for cannabis in 2013, and no doubt it's going up. I'll show you the next slide just to move along quickly. There's the arrest rates for all drugs, and you can notice that the cannabis proportion is increasing. But look, let's picture 60,000 people. Let's even say, okay, the 87% of those are just for consumer offences. MCG, I come from Melbourne, the Sydney cricket ground. It's about 80% of the capacity of a Sydney cricket ground. Another way to look at it is just, again, try and visualise this thing. You've got a line of people. How long would 66,000 people be? Do you remember we were at school and we'd do the PE thing? We'd put a hand on the person next to us and form a line? If everybody that was arrested for cannabis did that last year, it would be a line 33 kilometres long, from here to about Lisbon. It just beggars belief that we can let this tragedy go on. The police now, as other speakers have said, have been pursuing very aggressively the policies. You've got there the figures of consumer arrests, and consumer arrests is sometimes over an ounce of pot. Nothing. You buy a pot, give it to four mates, you could be arrested for drug dealing. Moving along, look, cannabis, the myths of prohibition, reefer madness. Look, we know where it all started. Just a couple of quick overviews of. I've brought a lot of these things in the talk. I'm not really one for these presentations. They tend to be just a backup for where I'm going to go on as I impart my frustration and my call to action to change this thing. Alcohol is safer than marijuana. I was talking to Abe, who'll be talking later in the day, from California. They ran a very successful campaign in relation to marijuana being safer from alcohol. And look, this is just a no-brainer. There's alcohol, if it was invented today, would be banned in a heartbeat. Alcohol has got domestic violence, lack of coordination, road trauma. And let me just digress here again quickly. What's happening in New South Wales is again just outrageous. We're going to have this year 200,000 people tested for roadside drug testing. This is another way to persecute, prosecute, demean, vilify cannabis users. They are now testing people for minute traces of cannabis in the system that was used anything up to 7 to 5 days ago. And this is, again, the police that are getting zealous, overreaching on this and prosecuting us, not for impairment of driving, which is a fair cop. If you're shit-faced, stoned off your mind and driving home, sure, you should not be allowed to drive. But if you're just simply driving your kids to school, and the cost to the community of this increased persecution is enormous. People losing jobs, people not being able to drive people to school. I'm conscious we're not going to have time for things, but look, just on this one issue, this is a headline in Queensland now. They had a commission into crime, and look at the cute headline there, pot heads into heroin, ecstasy and cocaine. The journo's almost having a laugh there, but the bottom line is that there is legislation slated in Queensland to keep increase the ante and treat cannabis the same as marijuana. The United Nations Drug Control Conventions, we've just had a meeting in the United Nations, it misclassifies cannabis as a drug alongside heroin. The medical cannabis, look, I'm trying to cut this short, but look, I have major reservations with how we're going with the medical cannabis. It's so limited access, they're getting whole infrastructures, they're not even defining what cannabis is, and at the end of the day, one of the assumptions of even the medical steps, and look, I'm two-minded, I do appreciate we're moving forward in this debate, but we've got to be careful that we don't lose where we're going. Only sick people use cannabis. Well, that's not just true. People that might be a bit depression might use it for a number of things to relax, and there's nothing wrong with that either. Okay, as you picked that up, Drug Policy Australia is the organisation. That's our website address. I'm going to be a bit cheeky here, if I may, and Kath, I need you for a minute. My dad said to me once, son, never let a chance go by. So I bought the proverbial hat there. I've got some business cards in the hat. If you want to take a business card and get in contact, and I think without saying, the hat is, we are a fully fledged charity. We will issue tax-deductible donations if anyone wants to take a card and tip us in with a bit of start-up capital. But otherwise, if you've got a buck or two coin, drop it in. And I do that unashamedly. This is a cause that we've really got to get involved in. Otherwise, give me a call, give me an email. The movement's starting and we've really got to join ourselves together. I'm angry, I'm mad, and I think we've got to say, I've had it and I'm not going to take this anymore.
Thanks very much, Greg. Any questions, please? Raise your hand and we'll bring you a microphone.
Good question. Look, addiction is a very misused notion. I believe that certainly there's physical addiction, which is really the low end of the scale as far as addiction is concerned. And this is what in the 60s and 70s people defined as addiction, you know, the horrors, withdrawal, physical cramps, physical pain and everything. And as I say, I've been addicted to many things, tobacco and heroin. And the easy thing with heroin is again the misnomer, it's getting over 3 days of feeling a bit ill is a piece of cake. You know, if you're a heroin addict, you're pretty hardcore, you know, you've been through a bit of suffering. So a little bit of pain ain't the thing. So addiction is not the physical withdrawals, they're real. Addictions are psychological. And here's the thing that we're up, and again, this is something I'm happy to share with people. Addictions are psychological. I would actually consider tobacco to be more addictive than heroin. And I know that's controversial, but you know, there's absolute, you know, a hook in tobacco and the chemicals that are psychological addiction. And the same with heroin, psychological addiction. You know, people can give up, go to rehab a month or two. Ice, the same thing. It's a psychological addiction. If you've got people with that problem, kids, families, friends, know what you're up against, and that is psychological addiction. They're craving to repeat the behaviour well when the drug has left their system. And why are they doing this? Because they're trauma. They're using these drugs to overcome some perhaps abuse, post-traumatic stress, you know, or just the pains of growing up. So addiction is about a psychological cure, relief to their addiction.
So I meant more when would use become addiction then?
Sorry, I can't hear.
When would use become addiction then?
Look, this is again, I don't actually like the word addiction. I prefer the word problematic drug use, because there comes a time, and I think we know it yourself, of when one's drug use begins to be problematic. And I touched on this before. You know, when you're using it first thing in the morning, when you're using it to go to family events, when you're using it to do your normal social engagements. When it's affecting your productive life, when it's affecting, you know, where you're going to be on time, when you're missing work. These are obviously measures of an alcohol addiction. These are measures of a pot addiction. You know, people can be using too much cannabis. And again, the answer to addiction, this is again the thing that's misunderstood, it's finding something you love, something you enjoy, finding some pleasure as an alternative to the endorphins that are released when you use a chemical substitute. So,
Would that be also in a positive sense though?
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding.
In terms of like why you would choose to, like we've gone over the benefits of why people might use marijuana and cannabis, especially like that it can be part of your good daily life as well. And so I'm kind of failing to understand where you draw the distinction of like why would it be then necessarily problematic or addictive to be smoking in the morning or to be smoking to go to a family event if that's not problematic in your life?
Look, yeah, I think I've answered that, to be fair. There is no hard and fast, you're either not, but this is a gradation, if you like. But I will say problematic drug use, if you've ever had problematic drug use, you tend to know it.
Just a moment, please. I'll come give you the mic. And this will be the last question. So if anyone wants to keep chatting to Greg, please go out to the deck afterwards.
I was just going to say, it's what Scott was saying, that someone can use it through their daily life, like David, and have a very productive life, or someone else might have a problem with it. It actually stops them doing the things that they want to do in their life. And I think that's what you're trying to say. Is that what you're trying to say?
Look, thank you very much. Exactly. There's no line, but where it's affecting with, again, friends, family, as I said, problematic. And this could be alcohol, this could be a number of things. I mean, look, even addiction to tobacco. There comes a time when you know you've got the bloody cough in the morning where it's affecting, you know, your sporting thing that you want to do on a Saturday afternoon. But it's a personal choice. I don't think the state can define these things. So, yeah, thank you.
Great. Hey, Greg, thank you very much for that very quick overview. I understand you had a lot of information to impart and it could go on forever, but